Hey, DawgNation, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. So glad you're with us to start the week. You know, it's supposed to be springtime. The weather is terrible outside, but we're going to have a good time here on the program. Nonetheless, Chip Towers returns to DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza here today. Looking forward to getting some insight from Chip about a busy weekend for Georgia. Scrimmage over the weekend. Some pretty fascinating audio from Kirby Smart's going to start our program today. Interesting breakdown from him of Justin Fields, maybe a little bit of a pushback to what he had said a week ago about his freshman quarterback. It is all on the way next. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. It begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We'll spend a lot of time on the show over the course of the next couple of days reacting to Kirby Smart's reaction to his team's scrimmage over the weekend. Of course, this is sort of a rite of passage here in the spring. We'll all see this for ourselves coming up on G-Day on April the 21st, but there are a couple sort of dress rehearsals for, not really dress rehearsals for G-Day, but just dress rehearsals for the season. Intense competition that goes on behind the scenes with these scrimmages, and then we hear Kirby Smart's assessment of that. He's not like a lot of the coaches, at least used to do, where you sort of give the stats and kind of give some specifics about the scrimmage. Kirby Smart doesn't really do that anymore, but nonetheless, when he says things about what he saw from his team and something that's close to an actual real football environment, you can't help but sort of be sort of fascinated with what he says. And, you know, what you'll hear from Kirby over the next couple of days, we kind of play some of this audio for you, is he actually sort of comes across like he's in a pretty good mood about all of this. It seems like, I mean, listen, I'm sure if he were here, he'd greatly dispute this. But he sort of seemed like he was in a fairly good mood about it all. He seemed like, you know, with his team kind of going, you know, head-to-head in a football scrimmage environment, seems like he was relatively happy with what he saw. Let me start with what he said about his quarterbacks here. Justin Fields working with the number 2 offense, Jake Fromm working with the number 1 offense. It sounds like Kirby Smart was at least relatively pleased. Here's Kirby.
I'm going to have to watch the tape to know exactly on the quarterbacks. I thought both guys did a really good job managing the huddle, no delay of games, communication. That part was good.
So good communication, managing the huddle. Seemed like there was some efficiency to the way that it worked there. A little bit of a nice rhythm, at least if you sort of listen to the description, kind of how it sounds from Kirby Smart. And now a little more from him on what these two guys, Fromm with the 1s, Field with the 2s, were able to do on Saturday.
Yeah, both quarterbacks, I thought they managed the situations well. Probably were not as effective in third down period when we went third on third, and it's an obvious passing situation. That seems to be where we're doing some good things defensively. But, yeah, I thought that both quarterbacks really competed hard and did some good things.
So what's semi-interesting about what Kirby Smart says there, and we'll get back to the Justin Fields part of this in just a moment, but a bit there on happy with everything I saw from the quarterbacks, with maybe the exception of third down situations, obvious passing situations, in what was a splendid freshman year for Jake Fromm back in 2017. I think we would all agree that was the one scenario that Georgia looked to try to avoid a season ago, was those obvious passing situations. Fromm was really good when he had the entire playbook at his disposal. Sometimes, you know, in the Auburn game on the road in November comes to mind here. When you put Georgia in some third and long situations like it found itself in that day, when Holland and Marlon Davidson and those guys were able to pin their ears and kind of come in on a pass rush, all of a sudden the Georgia offense probably wasn't quite as crisp there in that moment. Now, Georgia was good enough a year ago that it avoided that moment for almost the entirety of the season, but in obvious passing situations, that wasn't a strength of the Georgia offense a year ago. And it's sort of interesting to hear Kirby Smart saying, in this spring scrimmage here in 2018, that's also kind of the case there as well. So that's kind of an interesting, maybe partial assessment of Jake Fromm, although it's quite possible that I'm reading too much into that. But back to Justin Fields here for a moment. What's kind of fascinating about this is, you know, 2 audio clips there, both quarterbacks playing well, both quarterbacks, causing the offense to move here, both in terms of the rhythm with which they're playing, and also the fact that they're just sort of apparently, you know, picking up yards and kind of competing at a high level. Sounds like Kirby Smart's relatively complimentary there of both his quarterbacks. The assumption here, Fromm with the 1s, Justin Fields with the 2s. And what's sort of interesting about the Justin Fields part about that is that last week we actually spent a good bit of time here on DawgNation Daily talking about the notion that Justin Fields had hit some sort of freshman wall. And the reason why we were talking about the notion of Justin Fields hitting a freshman wall is because Kirby Smart had said he had hit a little bit of a freshman wall. If you don't remember, here's Kirby Smart from last week.
He's in a little bit of a wall. I think with all the installation, he's coming in, meeting extra, doing all the things we expect of him. But it's a lot, and we don't taper it for him. We allow him to come in, meet extra, learn it. I think he's really getting accustomed. We've done some different drills that he hasn't done before where he's got to move in the pocket and move around and be able to create space away from the rush, step up from the rush. And I think a lot of that's new for him. I think he's growing in that role. Certainly got good mobility when he gets out of the pocket, and he's done a good job picking things up.
Yeah, so listen, we push back on the notion that Justin Fields had hit the freshman wall on the show last week, or at least push back on the talk about it. If you remember how we set this up on Friday, I kind of mocked some of the viewers to SEC Country Live, the Florida fans, the Tennessee fans, the Alabama fans who don't want to do anything but stir up trouble, and they want to act like that Justin Fields is sort of behind schedule in terms of his freshman quarterback performance based on what Kirby Smart had said there. But obviously that can't be too true if a week after Kirby Smart saying that, Kirby Smart's kind of going on and on about Justin Fields and both quarterbacks really doing a pretty good job in the scrimmage on Saturday. That's not really consistent with a guy that had sort of hit the freshman wall. And I guess you can kind of lump DawgNation Daily in with a lot of the media when it comes to this particular subject, because on the entire notion of Justin Fields and kind of how he has performed so far this spring, maybe good in Saturday's scrimmage, maybe showing some steep learning curve, growing pains a bit last week, Kirby Smart, as probably not that big of a surprise, thinks all of this is sort of overblown, and the talk about Justin Fields hitting the freshman wall is overblown, and I'm sure he'd probably say the scrutiny that Fields is facing in its entirety this spring also a little bit overblown. Here is Kirby Smart doing what y'all love for him to do, which is chastising the media about Justin Fields and the freshman wall talk.
Y'all took that and really ran with that. I referenced the freshman, and then y'all completely threw it into like it was just him. That kid is really not like that. He's very intuitive. He's very smart. He picks things up well. So that was somebody blew that way out of the water. When I say hitting the wall, there's times where they kind of don't do as well as maybe we'd like for him to. And I was really talking about the other freshman, not so much him. And he didn't have his best day after that either. But, this week he's been very efficient, made good decisions.
So a couple things here. Kirby Smart acts like it's all the media's fault for, putting the narrative of the fact that Justin Fields might have hit a freshman wall out there. We do save the receipts around here on DawgNation Daily. We just played you the audio of what Kirby Smart said a week ago. So, it is in some respects Smart who got some of this started. But I think overall the point that Smart makes there is probably true. And I guess it's probably also worth sort of explaining what a freshman wall even is. Sometimes we also use this phrase in pro sports as well with kind of like a rookie wall. The thought is that as you step up in competition, things just get harder. Learning curve, as I said before, kind of gets a little steeper. The physical competition is more intense, and at a certain point, you just sort of it can be just maybe a little overwhelming for everybody, a little bit, even an elite athlete like Justin Fields. And maybe there had been some talk last week about maybe he was experiencing some of that, but apparently not so much so that he's incapable of being effective during a scrimmage, which I think is really good news for Georgia fans. But here's where it's also kind of gets interesting as well. Smart goes into a little bit more detail about exactly what Fields is like in these practice scrimmage-like scenarios and why making really any kind of evaluation of him during these type environments can actually be a little tough. This is pretty interesting from Kirby on Fields. Take a listen to this.
It's hard in a scrimmage because we're not tackling him. So a lot of that falls on me and the official. So you say, can you tell more? Can he take off running and do it? It's just like a practice because we don't hit him in practice. So I try to be as fair as I can, and, I get a bunch of shenanigans from the offensive sideline. If I call it a sack, they all disagree with me. So I try to put it on the official. And we got to go back and watch it, but I try to give them the benefit of the doubt because it's hard to say whether you would have tackled the guy or not.
The way that I see that from Kirby Smart is so different now that we had DawgNation Appreciation a few weeks ago, back during the month of March. Of course, that was a great night there at the Coca-Cola Roxy Theater with the former Georgia players, Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel and Davin Bellamy, Roquan Smith, Lorenzo Carter. And, they were all telling their stories about what the season was like, what the behind-the-scenes moments were during practice, and those sort of disputes that Kirby Smart just describes there. I thought that the players at DawgNation Appreciation did a great job of bringing us behind the scenes. That there is this huge sort of competitive fire between the number one offense and the number one defense. And Kirby Smart's been very explicit in the past that he likes going best on best during practice because it makes everybody better. But also it sort of adds to this intensity of defensive-minded head coach Kirby Smart, maybe the belief among the offensive players that he's a little too willing to call something a sack, whereas a running quarterback like Justin Fields might be able to break free in a real game and actually turn that into some positive yardage. Maybe Kirby a little tempted to sort of see the best in the defense there on that. After hearing the guys at DawgNation Appreciation, it's sort of easy to understand what Kirby Smart is describing there. But all in all, I mean, I think the bottom line of this entire discussion is that, yes, it may be a little bit difficult at times to evaluate how Justin Fields is going to perform in these kind of scrimmages because running the football, being a running quarterback is a big part of what he brings to the table. And obviously that's not, I would imagine, I'm not, privy to being there, but I would imagine that isn't probably a huge part of these scrimmages because they aren't going to hit him, and he is, I guess, working on developing his passing skills there, so that's not probably a huge part of what they're doing. But overall, I think Georgia fans should take all of this as good news, and we said this last week that the freshman wall that Fields might be encountering is not because of the fact that he's limited, but because of the fact that maybe Georgia's not putting much of a limit on what it's asking him to do, treating him like any other quarterback, despite the fact that he's technically still young enough to still be in high school. It sounds like the Justin Fields development here is ongoing and heading along at a pretty nice pace. And it sounds like the Georgia offense, both units, the number 1 offense, the number 2 offense, seem to work well in this scrimmage on Saturday, and good offense can only help to make the defense better. It seems like Kirby Smart was relatively happy with what he saw over the weekend, and if Kirby Smart's happy, then I think Georgia fans ought to be happy as well. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're glad you're with us. You watch us on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook page, DawgNation YouTube page. We're glad you do. On the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast form, Apple Podcasts, Android devices, wherever podcasts are found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just glad that you listen to DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, each and every day. And I got to tell you, I was a big hero on Saturday. A lot of times on, Saturdays, especially when it's kind of like a rainy Saturday, the family has a tendency to sort of lay around and get lazy, and sometimes, laying around and get lazy makes you hungry. And, I could tell that the kids, I have a young son, a young daughter, I could tell they were getting, kind of hungry on Saturday, and we had some things we're going to be doing later on that day, but I could just sort of tell they were just in the need for a little food here. So I picked up the phone and called Marco's Pizza. And you know what? Before long, Marco's was knocking on the door, pizza delivered, big smiles on everybody's faces. And we sat around the living room on Saturday, enjoyed some Marco's Pizza, and that's always a happy moment in our house when we're doing that. And if you haven't tried Marco's Pizza yet, you need to make sure you do it, including this great offer they have right now for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers, and I guess technically everybody, but I sort of like to think about this as a DawgNation Daily special. It's the boss of all cheese pizzas. They call it the Big Cheese. It's made with 5 fresh cheeses, and right now you can get – this is just a great deal. If you got a family, I mean, stuff like this matters. You want to save as much money as you can, and Marco's gives you a chance to do that because the Big Cheese with those 5 fresh cheeses right now, an extra large, is just $10.99. So check that out, the Marco's nearest you. We appreciate Marco's Pizza being a part of DawgNation Daily here today. We'll have Chip Towers coming up in just a moment. Good to have him back on the program today. A couple things I want to get to before that. I mentioned having some things to do on Saturday. One of the things that we eventually did was went to my brother's house. My brother's a big Georgia fan. He was hosting a Masters party on Saturday. It's kind of fun. Sit around, watch some golf with some people. And I was amazed over the weekend at that party, and then a lot of the stuff I saw online yesterday, how many Georgia fans wanted no part of Patrick Reed winning the Masters. Reed, you may remember, at one point in time was a UGA golfer, had some sort of weird circumstances that led to him not being a part of the Georgia golf program anymore, ends up at Augusta State. They actually won a couple NCAA championships there at Augusta State. He's obviously a terrific golfer. He goes on to win the green jacket, but a lot of Georgia fans were not too happy about this whatsoever. In fact, the tweet that gets passed around a lot this weekend, going back to the Notre Dame game, and if you're watching on video right now, you can see this. This is Patrick Reed from his own account here, from Georgia Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. He goes to the game. He is dressed like the Notre Dame leprechaun. If you're watching on video, you can see this. He's got the Notre Dame hat on. He's got the Notre Dame sweater. His significant other also dressed very much the same way. So sort of reveling and cheering against Georgia there at that game. He also has some other things kind of going on in his life there. So a lot of Georgia fans cheering against Reed over the weekend. Kind of interesting to see. Of course, he does go on to win it. And mixed emotions here, too, because Reed had been a hero of the Ryder Cup a couple years ago, and it was a terrific sporting event. But A lot of Georgia fans not too happy about Patrick Reed winning the Masters. I thought that was kind of a funny thing, maybe is the better word to say, to watch unfold over the weekend. A lot of UGA fans really voicing their displeasure on that. If they weren't happy about Patrick Reed, though, something a lot of Georgia fans were happy about, former UGA football star Bill Goldberg, also turned professional wrestling superstar, goes into the WWE Hall of Fame over the weekend, and in his acceptance speech, well, the former Georgia football player took a little bit of a dig at Georgia Tech. Now, the language is a little salty here, but if you're a UGA fan and you don't like the Jackets, you'll like Bill Goldberg here. Take a listen.
And as long as I'm 2-1 over Brock Lesnar, have the strength to jackhammer anybody in this damn room, and have the knowledge and wisdom that there is no way in hell that a Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket could ever, and I mean ever, be as badass as a Georgia Bulldog? I never say never.
So a little salty language from Goldberg, but pretty funny. I'm pretty sure what he's referencing there is former Tech player Joe Anawai is now a WWE wrestler as well. His name's Roman Reigns, and I think that was a little bit of a dig there from the pro wrestling sphere from Bill Goldberg. But Goldberg, kind of cool to see him going to the WWE Hall of Fame and sort of hearkening back to his UGA past there on that. So kind of an interesting weekend, a lot of respects for UGA fans. And of course, we like covering it all here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We're glad you're with us today, and hope you enjoy Chip Towers right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And we'll say hello to Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Always fun to have him in the program, but sort of important to have him on a day like this, coming off what was a pretty crucial scrimmage for Georgia here in the spring of 2018. And you know, Chip, I know you were in the room with Kirby Smart when he spoke to the media over the weekend, and what I sort of found fascinating about that is, and we spent a little bit of time talking about that before you joined us on the show here today, is the fact that Kirby Smart sort of went out of his way to sort of push back on the notion that Justin Fields had hit the freshman wall. And it was Smart himself who had said that a week ago, but it seems like he was relatively complimentary of how Fields had played during this scrimmage over the course of the weekend. What did you make of all of that?
Well, I mean, I don't know who said what to whom or whatever, but obviously when he, mentioned previously, he was asked specifically about Fields, previous to Saturday. And, I mean, the quote, if you didn't see it, I mean, it's, he kind of backtracked on Saturday saying that he was just lumping him in with the rest of the freshmen, and he wasn't talking about that Justin himself wasn't doing a good job. But what he said specifically was he's hitting the wall a little bit. I think with all the installation, he's coming in and meeting extra and everything, doing all the things we expect of him, but it's a lot. And, he also mentioned, with regard to all of the freshmen, that a lot of them are getting a little confused and stuff like that right now. And so, he was, so Saturday, naturally after the scrimmage, well, how did Justin Fields do, and he comes in there and says, yeah, y'all really took that and ran with it, last time. He's not hitting the wall or whatever. So, what I make of that is just, a coach, trying to keep, attitudes good and spirits high. And I'm sure, Fields probably had a pretty good day too. I mean, I would imagine, because that was like the last question of 15 minutes worth of questions, after the scrimmage on Saturday. And, at the end of the day, we're not in there to watch it. That's kind of what I think is one of the issues with it. I think it's silly that we don't get to watch more of a spring practice and make our own personal evaluations as opposed to being left to the spin of the coaches. But all in all, I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in between all that, that I'm sure Justin is doing a great job, and I'm sure he's struggling on recognizing coverages and checking in and out of plays like any other freshman usually is this time of year.
And I will, as a quick follow-up to that, say, of course, I guess I sort of speculate for a living here, but what I will speculate about Fields based on Smart's compliments on Saturday in comparison to, like, say, the Florida situation where Dan Mullen's not throwing a lot of compliments the way of his freshman quarterback Emory Jones right now. You know, we saw the Auburn quarterbacks, other than Jared Stidham, who was injured, on display in their spring game. I don't think Malik Willis or the freshman Joey Gatewood necessarily lit the world on fire on the Plains on Saturday. I mean, it certainly seems like, you know, based on Smart's words here, even including the stuff last week about hitting the freshman wall, that he is fitting into a college program a little bit better than maybe some freshmen sort of step right in and do. Now, that's no guarantee of how he'll play this fall, but certainly he's not been, you know, if you look at the totality of Smart's words here, it would certainly appear that he's not been completely overwhelmed by the moment that his first college practices have provided him. Is that fair to say in your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, here's what we know about Justin Fields. He is a legitimate 6'3", 225 pounds. He has great speed and a strong arm. He also has a high aptitude and had enough of scores and grades in high school to have qualified for Ivy League. So, you know, I think he's going to be okay, you know, at the end of the day. But here's also what I think. You know, I also think Jake Fromm's your quarterback. And I think the importance of Justin Fields is getting him ready to play in the instance that Jake Fromm goes down, just like the way Jacob Eason went down last year. You got to have two guys ready to play. Preferably you got three guys ready to play. And I think Georgia has that by and large. I mean, Stetson Bennett is a guy. I'm not sure if you know, in game 1 or 2, if something were to, God forbid, happen to Jake Fromm, I'm not sure that Stetson Bennett wouldn't be the first guy in, just in terms of having a full grasp of the offense. Now, you know, I don't know that. I mean, I'm just saying, early in the year, before Justin Fields had a chance to master everything, that might be the way it went down. Who knows? But that's the bottom line on Justin Fields, and I don't think there's any question about that. He has both the aptitude and the athleticism, you know, to perform well. And, you know, we'll all see for ourselves, you know, on G-Day, and still, you know, during G-Day, that's a, you know, controlled scrimmage, and there's still, you know, asterisks to put on anything that you see in a competition such as that. But I think Justin Fields is going to be a great college quarterback, and I think he's going to have a good spring relative to what you'd expect of any true freshman.
You know, once again, this, I guess, is in the sort of speculation category, but, you know, I listened to all of Kirby Smart's press conference from over the weekend, and I came away thinking that he was, at least based on his comments there, relatively happy with what he saw. I mean, I know he sort of had some things to say about the secondary and the defensive line, which we'll get to here in our conversation in just a moment, but overall, I mean, it seemed like his overall assessment was more positive than negative. Was that also your takeaway of Kirby from this weekend?
Yeah, I get a real positive vibe on Georgia's offense, period. And I you know, I honestly, really, Brandon, I mean, I think Georgia's going to have a really good offensive team this year. I mean, I think it's possible, even with losing Isaiah Wynn, that Georgia could be better on the offensive line. I think the wide receiver core was better than advertised last year, is going to be better this year because all of those guys, you know, maturing. You know, I think Terry Godwin is way better than maybe he gets a lot of credit for. I think Mecole Hardman's, you know, continuing to develop. You know, certainly you lose Chubb and Sony Michel, but I think in DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield and Brian Harrion and eventually Zamir White and James Cook, you're going to not lose much. And then I think Jake Fromm's going to be a better quarterback in year 2 than he was in year 1. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about on the offensive side of the ball. The flip side of that is, and it keeps coming up, you know, Kirby has legitimate concerns on the defensive side of the ball. And I think anybody who doesn't think Georgia's defense is going to take a step back, regardless of the recruiting, is kidding themselves. I mean, the production you got, you know, just from DawgNation Appreciation Night. Yep. I mean, you know, with Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy and Roquan Smith, just in those three guys alone, that's such a tremendous amount of production to think that you're going to instantly be able to recover from. And he's talked quite pointedly about being disappointed in the progress and development that he's seen from the defensive backs that have come so highly regarded and been so intensely recruited over the last couple of years. Those guys need to come through, and they haven't, according to him, so far.
Yeah, let me get into a lot of that because I thought that was also pretty interesting as well. Let me start with the defensive line. And, coming from the perspective of a fan here, Chip, I am really excited about that starting three if you want to be in a base 3-4. I mean, you don't get much better than Julian Rochester, Tyler Clark, and Jonathan Ledbetter. That's an embarrassment of riches that almost every team in the country would be envious of. But, man, if one of those guys gets hurt, it's an all bets are off type of situation. I mean, Georgia is really in a scenario right now, and Kirby touched on some of this on Saturday too, where, that group behind that when it comes to the defensive line is just a little thin right now. Great starters in all likelihood, but maybe not a whole lot of assurances about what comes after that, right?
Yeah, it's just simply a depth issue. That's all it is. And look, Georgia's done a fantastic job of recruiting. But if there's any criticism, and Jeff Santello will tell you the same thing. It's just been, in getting the real blue ribbon defensive linemen the past couple of years to come in. And certainly Tyler Clark is a great player, and Jonathan Ledbetter, and I think that, David Marshall and Mikhail Carter certainly came, highly recommended as well. But it's just a depth issue. And just think, Brandon, last season as we were watching Georgia through 15 games, how much rotation we saw on that defensive line. I mean, it was just it was almost a platoon job that Georgia did last year with Mel Tucker running those guys on and off the field, in droves. And, certainly based on what you've seen so far, I mean, you basically got 9 defensive linemen playing 4 spots when Georgia runs, probably it's kind of in a 4-2-5 more than anything else most of the time, even though their base is a 3-4. And, you just don't have them. You're only adding 2 more, through freshman recruiting that are going to join the team this summer. So that's a real concern. And then secondary, I mean, I think there's some depth there. I think there's some numbers. And, certainly when you think of guys like, Amir Speed and Eric Stokes and Trey Bishop, I mean, these guys were huge recruits. But Kirby was pretty pointed in his criticism of those guys not coming through and mastering. And let me say this, too. That is a hard position to play. I mean, that's not like you can be a freshman at tailback and you can come in and run a zone read play pretty easy and, take a pitch outside pretty easy and be good at it. But, being in the secondary and now you got to cover somebody, and sometimes you're in zone and sometimes you're in man and sometimes you're doing both. It's just a difficult proposition, and it's never easy for these guys to master. But I also know this about Kirby. He's hardest on that position probably overall because he played it in college, and I think if anybody can coach him up, it's Mel Tucker and Kirby Smart. So he's going to be extremely critical of him right now. He's going to be hard on him until we get, into those first couple of games of the season.
Yeah, the assessment he offered over the weekend was certainly pretty blunt. And the best I can tell, Mark Webb is a converted defensive back. It seems like, they would give him a chance to play, although I guess he didn't have a great scrimmage based on what Kirby Smart said. Obviously, Richard LeCount may be a future star. If D'Angelo Gibbs returns to full health, I think that he's a big factor there. But, you correct me if I'm wrong, Chip, a lot of those other names that you mentioned from that 2017 signing class, and boy, Georgia signed a bunch of defensive backs to the class of 2017. It just doesn't sound like those guys are all that close to getting into the game right now. It's really Webb, LeCount, and if he's on the team and healthy, Gibbs. Those are the 3 DBs from the 2017 class that have a likelihood of being on the field right now, the best I can tell.
Yeah, that's right. And you that's one of the problems. You don't know how much of what you're getting is spin and how much of it is reality. But I think Kirby Smart is a really, really difficult guy to play for if you play defensive back. He's notoriously hard on DBs. Alabama DBs talk about it. I remember when I went over there. Alabama was in the national championship, was in the playoffs, and Kirby had already been designated as Georgia's coach. So, I went and followed them for a couple of weeks through the playoffs. And, a lot of my questions were along those lines to those defensive backs. They just talked about how he was an extremely intense, difficult guy to play for, but extremely rewarding to play for. And, Kirby, this probably gets, underplayed. Kirby was a great defensive back. He was a great defensive back, especially, with regard to what he would talk about his athletic limitations. But he had a nose for football, and he knew when to be, how to be in the right place at the right time. So he's the ultimate, critic when it comes to that. Mel Tucker's the same way. So those guys are getting, all pro instruction back there, and it's hard to live up to, all pro standards.
I want to ask you a somewhat off-the-wall question to close out here in a moment. Before that, one more thing from over the weekend. This offensive line competition to me is pretty fascinating because, the best I can tell, and this is true before Jamari Salyer gets here this summer, this is a pretty good collection of talent, and making it even deeper is the fact that it seems like we're hearing some whispers about the freshman Trey Hill performing pretty well at practice so far. Do you think a guy like that, most people would think that Salyer's the freshman who could compete to play right away, if not, I guess Cade Mays too for that matter, but it seems like we're hearing some, relatively positive things about Trey Hill here. You think that, Hill could be a factor in what is a pretty deep competition at the moment?
Yeah, I think I've heard some. They're beyond whispers at this point. They're at least full blown talk about Trey Hill doing a good job, and that's one of the benefits of being able to come in as an early enrollee. Now Jamari Salyer, to his credit, didn't want to come in early. He wanted to stay at pace all the way through, and that's certainly understandable. But Brandon, let me tell you, that's the one area you can see a full-blown metamorphosis in Georgia football is just with that O-line group. They are just, they are the Great Wall of China. These guys are just huge. Now, size alone, and Kirby talked about this earlier, size alone doesn't dictate how good you're going to be on the offensive line, and I think Isaiah Wynn proved that to the world last year when he just really played. Literally to a first team all-conference level at left tackle. But, Andrew Thomas is clearly the real deal. He's making that transition over to left tackle, and apparently that has been seamless. So they're working on depth, and, he's talking about Kendall Baker. They're trying to get him ready to play a little bit of left tackle. But I think a lot of that has to do with they may be able to get bigger and stronger at left guard, and whether that's Trey Hill or Jamari Salyer when he gets here, or Notori Johnson or Cade Mays. You got Big Ben Cleveland, you got Solomon Kinley working over at left guard. These guys are going to, at the end of the day, I think Georgia's going to have one of the biggest offensive lines in America, and they certainly will, if not this year, once they transition from center, where they're getting great play from Lamont and Gilliard, but he's a relative midget compared to everybody else. This line is huge, and it's a difference-making line both in size and in pedigree. I think that's probably the biggest thing Georgia's got going for it right now.
Apologies for keeping you late here. I do want to squeeze in one quick final question, if you don't mind. And as I said, it's somewhat off the wall. But if I'm doing the math correct, you did cover Bill Goldberg when he was at Georgia, who just went in the WWE Hall of Fame over the weekend. Do you remember Goldberg as a player? Now, Chip, you should know I'm a big pro wrestling fan, so it's a big deal for me that a former Georgia football player is now a WWE Hall of Famer. But do you remember Goldberg as a player?
Yeah, I was young enough. I remember Goldberg as a player, and I remember him as a student and somewhat of a friend. I wasn't a whole lot older than him when was playing for Georgia, and I was covering the team, and so I'm not too proud to say I hoisted a pint or two with him, over the years in downtown Athens, and he's a fun guy and hilarious guy. Way before we ever knew that he would be, a Hall of Fame professional wrestler, and I'm not surprised that he's doing that. And but I tell you what, he's a fierce bulldog, as you heard from his Hall of Fame speech. He has never forgotten his roots. They go deep, even though he's from Oklahoma. His family goes way back with the University of Georgia. His uncle was a huge donor. In fact, has a level of the Butts Mayer building named after him. For the contributions that he's given to Georgia. And he lives in California and does all kinds of big time things. But at the root, at the heart of the matter, Bill Goldberg is a bulldog. He loves Athens. He loves the University of Georgia. He loves downtown Athens as well, but to that I can personally attribute.
Chip, that is a great story. Thanks for telling it here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon and reading a bunch from you this week at DawgNation.com as well.
You got it, pal.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
How about Chip and Bill Goldberg together in downtown Athens in the mid to late 80s? What a scene that must have been. Not quite sure who was in the role of wingman there, whether it would be Chip or whether it be Goldberg, but that is quite a sight to think about. Fun stuff there from Chip Towers here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. By the way, speaking of Goldberg, too, the thing that I remember about him in a Georgia uniform, I am old enough to have remembered him as a player a little bit. In fact, when I saw him debut in WCW for the first time, I recognized the name as that guy used to play for Georgia. And then it became sort of this weird thing when he became a superstar in the world of pro wrestling. But I also remember after he was a big-time wrestling star, he led Georgia onto the field in the cocktail party against Florida. I guess it would have been 98. I may have my year confused. It was definitely not 97, the year Georgia won. Would have been 98 or 99. I think it was 98 there maybe. In fact, I'm almost sure it was. And that was the year that, Donnan had Georgia in the black pants. And listen, I'm a little bit more of an old school traditionalist when it comes to uniforms now. Back then, but maybe not quite so much. So I thought the black pants were really cool there that day. And I love Goldberg leading Georgia on the field. I had such high hopes for that game. It did not work out the way that we wanted it to. But that's one of my Goldberg UGA memories, is leading the team on the field against Florida in 98 and ultimately not having that really add up to what you wanted it to. But, man, when it came out to begin with, I was kind of ready to go there on that. Speaking of being ready to go, we'll be ready to go with our SEC Through. I'll remind you to check out SEC Country Live this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country Facebook and YouTube pages. I'll also do a quick reminder here as well, as you're making your plans for G-Day. Don't forget, we'll do a spring game preview from the Marlows in Brookhaven there on that Tuesday night before. I believe it's April 17th. Y'all check me to make sure I've got the date correct. It's definitely Tuesday night. It's Tuesday, April 17th. We'll be live at Marlows in Brookhaven that evening. A lot of surprises coming up for that broadcast and that evening that I'll tell you about. But really fun Tuesday, April 17th, Marlows in Brookhaven, getting ready for the spring game there on a Saturday. So I hope you can join us for that. Speaking of spring games, there were a couple actually a total of 3 around the SEC over the weekend. Let me start with the Auburn game, where there was not a big crowd here. I was really surprised by that. And we've seen this be a little bit of a trend around the SEC here this spring. I don't know if I know weather impacted the South Carolina game a couple weeks ago. Maybe weather was not great for Auburn on Saturday either. Of course, Jared Stidham was not playing. Maybe that was a factor too. But, we think of G-Day is going to be packed out, we think, on April 21st. But it's not necessarily the same kind of enthusiasm around the rest of the SEC. I don't know if this is more about not having enthusiasm for the teams themselves, in the optimism about the upcoming season, or just not having enthusiasm anymore about spring games. But spring games have not been hot tickets so far this spring around the SEC. The Auburn game, Stidham doesn't play. The Auburn defense is going to be, I think, great this season. You can't really show that during a spring game because you're not, as Kirby Smart said before, you're not sacking quarterbacks and doing things like that. So you don't take much from that. But, I will say here for me that the quarterbacks you see a lot of, Malik Willis, who is, the backup for Jared Stidham, and Joey Gatewood, who is one of the sort of prime recruits for Auburn in its 2018 class. Neither of these guys are living up to the hype that you've sort of been given to them. A lot of people praise Willis a lot for what he's shown in practice. He's a dual-threat quarterback, and I never really thought he was the quarterback of the future for Auburn. I think the spring game performance, at least for now, would seem to support that idea. And, the Joey Gatewood, Cam Newton comparisons are pretty ludicrous. We said that at the time, and they feel even more ludicrous now. This is an Auburn team that has a really good starting quarterback in Jared Stidham, but I don't think they've got the sort of next Gus Malzahn quarterback waiting in the wings right now. Maybe Nix, is it Patrick Nix, whatever, the Nix kid who's the legacy for the class of 2019. Maybe he's going to be the guy, but not the guy on the roster currently, I don't think. Ole Miss and Arkansas also have their spring games on Saturday. These are 2 of the worst teams in the SEC. I don't know that you take a lot from either of those 2 performances. I will say I thought it was interesting what Nick Saban said about his quarterbacks, though. Not spring game for Alabama. They won't do spring game until April 21st, the same day that Georgia does. I think it's the same day. It's not. It wasn't this past Saturday. Is the point? But Saban did have some interesting things to say about his quarterbacks. Apparently, Tua Tagovailoa participated in the scrimmage despite the fact that he broke his thumb on what was, the first day of Auburn spring practice a couple of weeks ago. For the most part, Saban was, I think, pretty complimentary of how Tua functioned here in this scrimmage. So he's on his way back to full health. And it was somewhat tempered praise of Jalen Hurts here a little bit, that maybe Hurts got off to a slow start and then finished better as it was going along. If you look at the two quotes side by side, and we'll give it to you on SEC Country Live later on today, it seems like a little bit more positive about Tua than it is about Hurts. And, I mean, if Hurts can't outperform Tua Tagovailoa when Tua's dealing with a broken thumb, then the Alabama quarterback situation is all but decided. You could probably say the same thing about the LSU situation as well. They have another scrimmage. Ed Orgeron is one of the coaches out there that will release stats for his scrimmages. And once again, Miles Brennan comes shining through much better stats than Justin McMillan or Lowell Narcisse. I mean, I think the writing's on the wall here. McMillan and Narcisse may be better runners, but you can't have them, less than 50% completion percentage in every one of these scrimmages. Miles Brennan's connecting on more passes. It just seems likely that he's going to end up being the quarterback there. And then one final SEC story to get to here in our SEC through. Jeremy Pruitt was quoted over the weekend as saying that he's ready for his Tennessee team to show a little bit more physicality during its spring practices. And this in itself is not really news. Coaches say this kind of stuff all the time during the spring. But what I do find kind of interesting about it is the fact that Pruitt hasn't been saying more of this kind of stuff so far during the spring. A lot of the Tennessee talk has been about up-tempo offense and exciting offense. Even Pruitt himself kind of talking about these 11 guys, when they get clicking on offense, they can be fun to watch. Sometimes fun to watch sort of, is the opposite of physicality. And it seems like there's been not as much of that kind of talk from Pruitt, who's a disciple of that same Will Muschamp, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban brand of coaching. A lot of the stuff that Pruitt said so far this spring hasn't really been too much of a clone of Saban necessarily, but with the comments about physicality, maybe he's moving back in that direction, and we'll make that your SEC through. A little more audio from Kirby Smart here. I want to play for you on DawgNation Daily. There was a big catch that Terry Godwin had made in one of the practices this spring that had gotten some attention. Apparently, it was supposed to be a little bit like what he had done in the Notre Dame game, where he sort of extended the arm and almost did the Odell Beckham-style catch. And, this catch got passed around on video a little bit, too. I think Georgia actually had some official video of it. And Kirby Smart was sort of asked about that video and what Godwin's been doing when it comes to that kind of stuff. And Kirby had some really nice things to say about his big leader at the wide receiver position right now, Terry Godwin. If you're a Georgia fan excited about the wide receiving core, you'll be excited about what Smart says about Godwin here. Take a listen to this.
Terry's been doing that since 8th grade. I still remember him at 7-on-7 camp in Alabama in the 8th grade. He came out there and played corner and was giving up plays, and there was about 8 guys from Callaway High School that were jumping all over him when he was an 8th grader, and he's a little peanut, and he's grown from that to 9th to 10th to he was a dominant player in high school outside on the perimeter. When they threw the ball up, he makes plays on the ball. He has elite ball skills. I think he's working at a high level. He really pushes the unit and leads that unit with work ethic. That's really what we need. We need out of that group for him to do that, but he makes a lot of plays on the ball.
It's amazing to me how Kirby Smart's description of Terry Godwin has changed since Smart became coach. Back in 2016, I think it's pretty fair to say that Godwin at times almost seemed like he might be in Kirby's doghouse a little bit, maybe not embracing the physical part of being a wide receiver the way that Kirby needs for his guys to, and yet in 2017 that totally changed. The things that Kirby says there about what a good leader Godwin is, Kirby started saying that about him a year ago, really giving Godwin a lot of the credit for how McCole Hardman developed into a guy that can contribute and play at that position and really be a guy that Georgia can lean on and count on. Kirby gave Godwin some of the credit for being able to do that, and now considering him the leader of the group here, which is obviously what he needs to be in 2018. I agree with Chip Towers' assessment a moment ago. I think this Georgia offense can be really good. Y'all know I do have a little skepticism about the wide receiver core, at least if you want to measure national championship standards as how you want your position groups to perform. I got a little skepticism about the wide receiver core when it comes to that, but hearing Kirby say those good things about Terry Godwin makes you believe that maybe he can be the kind of leader that sort of pulls that entire group to more success. There's certainly plenty of young talent there, and having a guy like Terry Godwin to emulate should be good for all parties involved there. Pretty nice words from Smart when it comes to Terry Godwin. Let me take a moment before we wrap up here to also mention a couple other UGA sports from over the weekend. It is good news for the Gym Dogs. They finished second in the NCAA regional over the weekend over in Tuscaloosa, and I'm assuming this is I don't know enough about gymnastics to even say this, but I'm guessing this is a little bit of an upset. I mean, some of y'all may tell me that I'm wrong here. Gym Dogs moving on to the NCAA finals. I was maybe a little bit surprised by that. Maybe y'all were not, but it's certainly good news for the Gym Dogs here. After the second place finish, they will move on to the finals there. Softball also wins its series over the weekend as they hosted Missouri. Softball team's been red hot, and they continue that. It's one of the best teams in the country right now. Diamond Dogs baseball team does come back to earth a little bit. They won the game Thursday night against Vanderbilt, dropped the next two, so they lose their first SEC series of the season to Vanderbilt. Diamond Dogs will look to get back to their winning ways. I believe it's Kentucky this upcoming weekend in the SEC, but they do lose the series to Vanderbilt there, and we'll get ready to wrap up the show. And as we wrap up, of course, we always want to remind you that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, we believe that Georgia fans are supposed to be Gatorators. We think that Georgia's supposed to be looking at Florida as its #1 rival. We love what Bill Goldberg said about Georgia Tech. We have fun with that. Of course, we like poking at the in-state rival here a little bit, but it's the cocktail party that matters to us here. In 201 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, beats Florida again. It's our Gatorator Countdown here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and we do it every single day, and we're glad that you do it right there along with us. I will also say that it did become official, I guess, over the weekend that the 2019 offensive lineman Luke Griffin has announced his decision to decommit from Georgia and kind of look on at other places. And, I mean, I think we're in a situation here now where, for Georgia fans, the only thing to do here is wish Luke well. He'll find a good college home. He'll be happy, and he'll go on to enjoy great success, and Georgia fans will wish him well as he does that, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And for those of you on video, we'll have a chance to talk to you right now. Appreciate you being here to do all that with us. We'll knock out some Facebook comments, some YouTube comments. Jay Ryan McNew says, see you in Jacksonville. Jay, I look forward to seeing you all as well. Chad Clark giving you a little blind squirrel emojis. Appreciate that. Mitch Marchman says, let me get his comment here. This is going to be a good one. He says, I lived in McWhorter Hall with Bill Goldberg, and he worked hold on, let me find this comment. Where'd it go? Did we lose his comment? I may have to find that one again because somehow I lost it. It was about Bill Goldberg. I wanted to read it. Well, now I can't find it. I'm not sure what happened to that. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. I wanted to read the good comment there about Bill Goldberg. If you're still listening, pop it back in there because I missed that. Santiago Diarn says, B.A., what weaknesses do you think Jake Fromm needs to work on? Love your thoughts. So I did find it interesting what Kirby Smart said a moment ago, that maybe both offenses had a little bit of trouble in obvious passing situations. As we said off the top of the show, that's the one area that we knew that Georgia wanted to avoid a season ago. And as Fromm gets a little older, you think you'd be a little less concerned about that. Maybe that's one of the areas in which you still want to see that development from Jake Fromm. Can he be a good quarterback in an obvious passing situation? Maybe the Auburn game on the road back in November was an example of that not necessarily being the case. Maybe this season you see a little more of that. I think that Fromm's also got a responsibility this year to make some wide receivers better. And, I know sometimes we go round and round about how good this wide receiving core is, and obviously, some of y'all have been right before where my evaluations have been wrong. But I think this is one of those things this season where, maybe you get a J.J. Holloman more involved, and Jake Fromm, with his accuracy and his ability to read defenses, finds ways to make him better. You think about, I'm not comparing Jake Fromm to Tom Brady here. Please understand that. But think about how Tom Brady does this at the NFL level. When I was a kid, it was Joe Montana doing this for the San Francisco 49ers. He'd throw the ball to 9 guys in a game. For New England, I don't follow the NFL that closely, but I do follow it closely enough to know they take away his receiving weapons every single year. They're always trading away receivers and getting cheaper there and asking Brady to do more and more, and he just takes whoever he's given and he finds a way to make them good. He makes these guys. I have no doubt that if Gronk went to play for some other team, he'd be less effective in another uniform than he is in a Patriots uniform because Tom Brady makes everybody better. That's one of the things I'd love to see Jake Fromm, this season, take a wide receiver core where we may debate just how strong this unit really is, but Fromm turns those guys into truly effective wide receivers because of the fact that he just has that much command of an offense. Brad Parker, going back to Luke Griffin, says he's a good friend. He's a really good young man. He's recovering from 2 ACL surgeries. That's an important thing to remember about Luke, Brad. That's a really good point. Wishing him a really good season this year. He'll always be. He's always been a dog. Yeah. So, Brad, I completely agree with you on that. And the evaluation of Griffin, that's an important thing to bring up. I want to say Jeff brought that up. Last week on Tuesday, that he's dealt with some injuries, and some of the evaluation of him as a player is going to be somewhat clouded based on the fact that he hasn't been 100% healthy. But I have no doubt that Luke's going to go on to a great college career, and I appreciate that. Michael Bishop brings up a good point. Fromm's going to have all day to a throw, much more time this year to find open receivers. I mean, I don't think you can discount that part of the conversation at all. That the Georgia offensive line, I mean, there are so many seemingly quality pieces competing for playing time there. This offensive line is likely going to be way better than it was a year ago, which means that guys like Fromm or Fields when he in the game could take dramatic leaps forward just because there's a lot more protection. Good offensive line just makes everything seem so much easier and better. And the opposite of that's also true as well. Jason Hauver says, B.A., what do you think about Paul Johnson's extension at Georgia Tech? Is it great for the Dogs? Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, Georgia's going to keep beating up on Paul Johnson the way that it has for most of the time he's been there since going back to 2008. I also think if you're Georgia Tech, though, I mean, like, maybe that is just the best option. And I say that no pun intended with the word option. If you can't be Georgia, if you can't be like a Clemson or an SEC power, then at least be sort of irritating to deal with. And the fact that Georgia has to spend extra practice time getting ready for Georgia Tech is probably a bit of a feather in their cap. They probably like that a little bit. So, I mean, maybe that's the best option they have, is to just be a nuisance to Georgia, if not an actual outright competitor. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment, and we'll come back and get some Facebook comments. A lot of good ones coming in today. Terry Cruz says that I must be related to Pat Dye with the way I brag on Auburn. Terry, I don't want to be in the position to have to do this. I say this in SEC Country Live a lot. I don't want to talk nice about Auburn, but I do find it amazing how easily and quickly, and I think even some of our own people here are guilty of this sometimes, there's this total disregard of Auburn. This is still, to me, a top 10 team. And I mean, we showed you some of the numbers last week in terms of how the analytics community is sort of breaking down this stuff. The gap between Auburn and the 4th, 5th, 6th best team in the SEC looks pretty wide right now. Do I think that Georgia's going to lose to Auburn this season? I really don't. I think Georgia wins that game. We know Auburn has some trouble away from home. But, I'm amazed at how many people, and it's not just Georgia fans, it's Alabama fans too, they act like Auburn can't, tie its shoes. And I mean, Auburn beat Alabama last year. Could do it again this year. I find myself in the uncomfortable position of having to defend something I don't want to defend, but I can't let people act like Auburn's going to go, 7-5. I don't think they're going to. Mike Johnson's daddy mentioning a UGA fan that's passed away this week, Todd Garrison. I don't know Todd personally, but it sounds like some of y'all are friends with him. Certainly condolences and well wishes out to you all that did know him and Todd's family there. I do know that Georgia fandom is a cool thing, and, of course, all sports fandom probably has this, but I'm just familiar with the Georgia fandom part of it. The bond that you form with the people that you watch games with is pretty special. And, it's true in the good moments and it's true in the bad moments, because the great wins are always made better because of who you watch them with, who you experience it with. And the tough losses are a little easier to endure because of the connection you have with the people who feel the same way that you do. It's one of the reasons why I like college football so much. The sport in and of itself is not that important, right? I mean, lives aren't changed by the wins and the losses, but we live our lives rooting for these wins and hoping to avoid these losses. And it's really the connection with people that ends up mattering more than anything else. And it sounds like some of y'all had that with Todd. And so certainly wishes to all of you about that. Jacob Mahaffey on YouTube talking about Terry Godwin. Hope he has a good year to set him up for the draft. Yeah, I mean, I do as well. He's certainly a tremendous athlete, and let's see if he can just kind of show some of those polished receiver skills this season that do set him up to earn some draft attention here coming up this spring. Dre Busey says, I get this criticism a lot. He says, B8, man, you got to realize we have 2 former 5-stars and a high 4-stars, our starting receivers, that are now juniors and a senior. You got to come on, man. So here's my issue, and I don't want to get painted as a guy that's completely down on the receiving corps, because I'm not. I'm not. But I do think that Terry Godwin was an athlete coming out of high school, and McCole Hardman was listed as an athlete coming out of high school. I think there can be a difference between athletes who are taught the receiver position and sort of natural receivers that you inherit. That's what the 2019 class at Georgia is going to show you. Guys like Blaylock and certainly Hazelwood are going to step right in and be factors right away because they are true, authentic receivers. I think Hardman has a chance to be very good. Godwin has a chance to finish up on an extremely high note. But there's a little difference in athletes turn receivers and receivers who happen to be gifted athletes. So, Georgia's goal here is to build position groups that are elite at every single level. And if you want to compare Georgia to the average college football team, then its wide receivers are going to be blowing doors against almost all those teams. The SEC teams that it plays this season, for instance, yeah, Georgia's wide receivers stack up pretty nicely. But when you want to get to December, possible rematch against Alabama, that's where it really starts to matter how truly elite you are at every single group. And that's the standard by which I think that Godwin and Hardman have to grow into over the course of the year. Al Chandler bringing up a good point that one of the things that Kirby Smart sort of brought to Georgia is that receivers who are also good blockers. I think that's a really good point. Erica Allen bringing up Tommy Bush. That's also a really good name to think about, too. Bart Bloor talking about the demeanor of Terry Godwin. Yeah, I'm impressed by that as well, Bart. That's a really good point. Brett Page says, I think a lot of our receivers are similar, but I'd like to see a rotation with the Landers or Holloman. Yeah, get some of those bigger guys in. That might be kind of fun, too. I think they'll have a chance to do that, Holloman especially. Al Clements says we will have those natural receivers coming in for 2019. Al, I'm really excited about that. I think the Georgia offense is going to be a blast to watch in 2019 and 2020. I really do. A couple more comments. We're going to get out of here. Mitch Marchman's. This is the Goldberg comment. All right. So what Mitch says, and I'm sorry I lost this earlier, Mitch. He says I was living in McWhorter Hall. Goldberg lived there too. He worked the door at the Odyssey downtown. He was definitely a beast back then. Also, yeah, I've heard some of those stories. He was a pretty tough guy. I understand. Miriam Martin Corbin saying, we need to stomp Auburn really good at home this year. Yo, I'd love to see that. No doubt about that. That'd be a lot of fun. And talking about those receivers, Eric Moody says, don't forget about Charlie Warner over the tight end position, too. Yeah, athletic tight ends like Nod and Warner are going to be catching some balls for sure. Hard Times 57 over on YouTube says, with all the RPO stuff everybody's running now, Georgia Tech's probably not going to be quite as hard to get ready for. I also think Kirby Smart, last season made a point of saying that you heard these little moments where they would sort of take breaks from when they didn't have a game week to kind of work on Georgia Tech a little bit. And I think a lot of what they were doing, if I understand correctly, and there's certainly a chance that I don't, is they were sort of like getting the scout team ready to do a good scout team practice by the time you finally got to Georgia Tech game week, which just goes to show you Kirby Smart's attention to detail. I mean, it's really hard to sneak up on him now with a funky offense because of the fact that Smart is so buttoned up as a coach. It's one of the reasons why Georgia fans justifiably enjoy him so much at the helm of the Dogs here. Really glad to have had you with us today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Appreciate your time. We'll look forward to more comments throughout the week here. We'll have the audio version of our show posted for you at the world-famous DawgNation.com and all the various podcast outlets within a matter of moments. I'd love to see you this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for SEC Country Live. And then, of course, back here again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.